Jess Graff, the floor is, or I shouldn't say the floor, the screen is yours. And my understanding is that you're going to be actually driving the PowerPoint presentation as well.
Yes, thank you. Yep, I have a little PowerPoint presentation. It's not fancy, but I think it'll do. So what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of the state of the union of homelessness in our community. I'm not necessarily going to be talking about resources and programs and services that are available to people that much. I will a little bit at the end. But I thought that it was important for us as a community to sort of share an understanding of what we're facing in our region and around the state in terms of homelessness and housing insecurity. So hold on, let me bring up my PowerPoint. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. All right. So I'm going to give you a bunch of data, and I'm going to tell you ahead of time that this data changes every day. And so please do not get out your calculators and check my math, because I've been using this pieces of the PowerPoint presentation for a few different things. And so frankly, even if I do check the data day to day, it can change. And so it's data that's been collected in 2021, so since January, and I tried to make it as up to date as possible, but it might not always match up exactly. Okay, so this is what we have. So a year ago, at our point in time count, which was last year, was January 22nd, 2020, and the point in time count is a federally required date where all over the country we do sort of an inventory of housing or homelessness rather. And so last year we had 49 people who were living in emergency shelters in our area. That's Samaritan House, and Voices also has an emergency shelter, and transitional housing programs. And there were 26 people living in motels that was paid for by the Agency of Human Services Economic Services Division. And we counted 2 people who were living outside with a total of 77 people. And it had been pretty consistent. It hadn't gone up dramatically or down dramatically in the last decade or so that I've been participating in the count. And so in 2021, the PIT count numbers are not totally official yet. They haven't been posted, but I was able to do a little bit of data digging, and it was a little bit different this year in that we did not do a count of unsheltered people for a couple of reasons, COVID safety, and also because really right now, most people who might have had to have been living outside or in cars are in the motels because that program has shifted. Last year, when we did the point in time count, or last year in general, when the motel program was running through Economic Services Division, it was different in that there were rules to access it, and many of those have changed and been lifted because of the pandemic. So this year, we had 54 individuals in motels and 31 individuals in shelters and transitional housing. And so that is 140% increase in homelessness in 1 year. It's a really big shift. Oh, also stop for questions anytime. You can we don't have to wait for the end. People can ask questions whenever. Okay, so as of yesterday, we had 128 individuals in 93 motel rooms that are being paid for by the St. Albans Economic Services Division Emergency Housing Program. Not all of those people are in St. Albans because our St. Albans motels are maxed in terms of capacity. And so many people who are homeless have to access motel rooms out of county. So we have some people placed in Chittenden County and some people in Lamoille. That represents 115 adults and 13 children. And that's down compared to where it was 3 months ago or so, which is which is good news, in part because we have access right now to a lot of resources to support people transitioning out of motels. We have 173 individuals enrolled in coordinated entry. And that's larger because that encompasses not just people who are in motels, but also people who are living in shelters. The shelters do have guests right now, although they are limited in their guest capacity to be able to have safe social distancing. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion about whether or not this increase in homelessness is really just a result of the current health crisis. And people have good arguments in both directions. But actually, we as a community really believe that these numbers are closer to a truth of homelessness in our community. In the past, when we have, so before the pandemic, we didn't have programs and services that could be responsive to the need. Our shelters often had wait lists. Sometimes the wait list at the Samaritan House got towards 100 people. Really, homelessness was driven underground, and families often would have to sort of double up and live in overcrowded situations. And now that we have, through this emergency housing program, really expanded our shelter capacity, we're seeing a more honest look at the numbers. These are some pictures that we took of encampments in St. Albans. There was a small group of us that did some encampment outreach. So this is what homelessness looks like in our community. These are two of our more, I think we probably have really 5 well-established encampments that we sometimes try to do outreach to, and these are 2 of those. They're right in the center of the city. You drive past them probably, weekly if you're in St. Albans, and often don't even see them. Okay, so from a statewide perspective, we have housed over 5,000 individuals through the emergency housing program in the state, with a record of 2,500 people and 386 of whom were children experiencing homelessness in motels in January of 2021. And this is very expensive. It's been a great program in that we've been able to offer more services and shelter to a larger amount of people, but it comes at a significant cost of about $6 million a month. And right now that is being funded 100% by FEMA and federal funding because of the governors declaring a state of emergency. But there is talk about what to do when that funding ends and how we will continue to be able to provide supports and services to people without that funding. I have some demographic information about people that I'm just going to go through really quickly. We have really mostly single adults in the motels right now. We have very few children, although our number has gone up in the last week. We do have 23 youth under 25. We have really, for the most part, our age range is between 18 and 55. And mostly they are single adults. Let's see. We have 70 people that report having a mental health condition, and 17 individuals that identify as having a developmental disability. and 48 that report having a physical disability. And some highlights from this are 53 of our individuals identified as receiving substance abuse treatment in their lifetime in an inpatient facility. 69 individuals identified as having been incarcerated in their lifetime. So homelessness really is not the only issue that people are facing. There's a lot of trauma that they're bringing with them to their current situations, and a lot of barriers, not just to housing, but also employment. 63 of them identified as having an IEP when they were in school. And 31 identified that they had been in a psychiatric facility. So we're talking about a population that really, for the most part, has some pretty high needs. Okay, so that's sort of where we're at in terms of the numbers and some demographics. And so there are groups of us that are meeting really daily in the community to sort of talk about housing insecurity and homelessness. And when we talk about a solution, we often will talk about sort of a three-legged stool that looks at housing case management, housing vouchers, and affordable housing. And so I will start by talking about what we have for housing case management in our area. We have about 21 staff across 8 agencies that can provide housing case management, but you'll notice that many of them are really only part-time. And so it really is an equivalent of about 9 full-time employees that are able to provide intensive housing case management services to people. And those are spread from Samaritan House, Restorative Justice Center, Pathways, Parent-Child Center of NCSS, Voices Against Violence, Franklin Grandal Community Action. Economic Services Division has 6 reach-up caseworkers who carry as part of their caseload some housing case management for individuals who have Vermont rental subsidies. But again, that's just part of the broader services that they offer, with a very large caseload of other individuals who are not receiving housing case management. And AgeWell also provides support. So I think that looks like a pretty good list, but the truth is that we have a serious lack of housing case management, and it's not just dividing up those 21 staff with the 170 people that we currently have. They are carrying full caseloads. Their caseloads are already full. People need housing case management, not just while they're homeless, but once they're housed. Often when people access vouchers or rental subsidies when they're housed, there's certain requirements around meeting with a case manager for a certain amount of time. With a Vermont rental subsidy, it's a monthly visit for the duration of the voucher, which can be 18 to 24 months. And then if they transition to a Section 8 voucher, that requires another year of housing case management after they've transitioned. So they're carrying pretty full caseloads currently with just people who are housed and meeting their voucher requirements. Let's see. So the other tricky thing about housing case management is that it's categorized. So for example, the Restorative Justice Center has an individual who can provide housing case management, but only to individuals who have a history of Department of Corrections involvement. And we at Community Action have a housing retention specialist who works with individuals who have received a CARES voucher, which is a type of housing voucher. But she can only work with those individuals. So people get sort of pigeonholed into working with a certain group. And that limits our ability to serve, especially the individuals that we have in motels right now, really do not fall into a category where we have housing case management for them. Those single sort of middle-aged adults who have fallen through the cracks and are often not being served by other agencies. We do not have a housing case management program for most of them. So we're also talking about people who have been homeless for quite a while at this point. In Franklin County, historically, what's considered our chronic homelessness numbers have been low compared to the rest of the state. And now those are going up, and chronic homelessness is defined in part by the duration of time that you've been homeless, but also with having other medical needs. And so right now we're looking at about 73% of individuals who are enrolled in coordinated entry who have been homeless for between 90 and 365 days. And frankly, I'm not sure I've updated that specific number in the last 30 days, so it's probably higher. So the housing case management needs for these individuals are really high. As we saw from some of the demographics information, it's not just a matter of sort of finding housing. They really need support with additional resources, accessing services, and ongoing support. Okay, housing vouchers, but I'll pause. Does anybody have any questions?
Melinda, didn't I see one from Alex to Jess, or am I wrong in the chat?
I can't see the chat, so that'd be great if anybody could.
So in the chat, Alex had said, Jess, a question to respond to any time, and I know you've touched on elements of this. How can community organizations who are not directly involved in the work, but who are aligned with this vital mission, help amplify these programs and needs?
Yeah, I really hope that today we can come to a shared understanding that there isn't one organization that's really carrying housing. There's not one organization that's charged with, we have some organizations that are charged with, mental health and physical health and, economic services division with sort of financial resources and supports, but there isn't an organization I can name, not one organization that just holds housing in and of itself. It's really fractured, and it's all of our responsibility. It really is something that we need to, as a community and our agencies, really rally around. It's the foundation of all of those other services that we provide. If people don't have housing, they're not going to have mental health. If people don't have housing, they're not going to achieve physical health goals. If people don't have housing, they're not going to be able to gain employment or further their education. It's the foundation. And if we really want our organizations and the goals that we have in our organizations to be successful, we have to start here.
Jess, can I make a comment too? This is Robert.
Oh my God, please, Robert.
Yeah, I think that one of the maybe responses to Alex's question also is that we need to look at housing as a community health issue. And one of the processes we're engaged in through the Blueprint of Health is to begin to have housing security assessments part of a regular wellness checkup, so that the non-traditional, if you will, housing partners, such as the medical community, hospital, and local health clinics and so on, can begin to look at housing status as something that needs to be assessed. And one of the resistances to that in the larger community is that if you're an assessor in one of those organizations and you identify housing insecurity as an issue, what can you do about it? And if you don't have a response, then it's really difficult to raise that as an issue with your client or your patient. So we're beginning to try to find out how ways we can link with the healthcare community to provide them with tools that they need in order to respond effectively when they've identified housing insecurity as an issue. And certainly it is a public health issue. You know, the whole idea of social determinants as an area that can be effective in reducing healthcare costs because you are taking care of the community health early on, and dollars spent in that upstream direction are not going to be spent bedside when those social determinants result in poor health for an individual or a community at large. So we're trying to expand the consciousness about housing so that it includes more and more agencies and begin to have a stronger network with what other kind of non-traditional partners can become involved.
Thank you, Robert. Well said. Okay. Next, so the second leg of the stool we're going to talk about is housing vouchers. And I have some data to underline the importance of why we need housing vouchers. So of the 154 adults that we have enrolled in coordinated entry, 64 of them report having no income, not any income, zero. And another 54 individuals report having income under $1,000 per month. For our region, rent reasonableness is set at $1,139 for a 1-bedroom and $1,466 for a 2-bedroom, which really that's a really big difference for most of the people that we have on our list. Without a housing voucher, they could not afford an apartment. 76% of coordinated entry enrolled adults are not going to be able to sustain housing without housing subsidies. So here's some information about sources of income. Only 17 people report earned income. 13 individuals reported unemployment. 52% of households who are enrolled in coordinated entry rely on some form of Social Security as their only income. We have 6 individuals who are receiving Reach Up, 3 that report being eligible for and receiving general assistance. So these are really people who are experiencing pretty extreme poverty. Here at Franklin Grand Isle Community Action, we have a program called the Housing Opportunity Program, or HOP funding, and that's something that we've had for a while. And we, as part of that funding, we are able to support people with security deposits if they need to move into a new apartment or to pay back rent. In the past 5 years, we have awarded over $600,000 in assistance to that program. And here's some information about area median income across the towns in our county. I pulled some information off of a website called Out of Reach, and this is the Vermont data. That's a national website. In order to be able to support sort of the average rent in our area, an individual would need to make about $23 an hour. Right now, the state minimum wage is $10.96, and the average renter's wage is $13.81. So you can see there's a pretty big difference there. In Vermont, we have about 76,000 renters, which is a renter percentage of about 30% of the population. So the average renter can afford about $700 for rent without spending more than 30% of their income. And that's the standard that's used to show that it's affordable, is whether or not it's 30% of their income. In Franklin and Grand Isle counties, really the average 2-bedroom is about $1,500 and about, $1,200 for a 1-bedroom. And so that really, I think, illustrates the fact that rent is out of reach for many people. even more so for individuals who receive Reach Up. Only about 25% of Reach Up households have a Section 8 or some kind of a housing voucher. And the Reach Up grants are sort of antiquated in the amount of funding that they support. So really people who are receiving Reach Up receive less than 40% of what they need to sustain living. And that really makes it so that individuals on Reach Up can't afford basic needs of an apartment or utilities. Questions or comments? I'm much happier having this as a discussion more than a presentation.
Any questions, anyone? If so, just blurt them out.
So I did see that Winnie had a question in the chat. My question is, after obtaining an apartment, what programs are available to maintain staying in the apartment?
Okay, that is a great question. So when somebody, so as of yesterday, there are programs and services that can help people, but before yesterday, there weren't a lot. I will get to that at the end, actually. I'm going to talk a little bit about those programs and services after we get there. Okay.
I have a question. This is Jessica. Are there any, and I'm just so new, are there any Housing First projects in the works, or are there any Housing First projects around?
Housing First is a philosophy that many programs hold. Housing First in that, are you thinking Housing First in the idea that we say to people, you're homeless, here's a home, we'll move you in, and then
I'm coming from Portland, and we had I don't know, it was sort of a cooperative between the city and one of and a nonprofit called Preble Street, and they would build units that where people would be housed, and there was wraparound services in the building, and also like a manned front or person front desk that would sort of control the comings and goings. So it was a very supported living situation. So like apartment buildings, like little studio apartments.
yeah, not in Franklin County necessarily, but there absolutely there's a program like that in Essex, and I think another one. There's a couple like that in Burlington. The problem is that they're all full. There's not a space available, and so I will talk about that a little bit. But people, certainly we hold that as an ideal in many of our programs, that we would, that we believe in that model in our region and in our state, that we would house people first and not make barriers to their housing, like they, can show us that they've engaged successfully in treatment, for example, before they had access to an apartment. But we just don't have the units to give them housing first.
Sure. Thank you. I didn't mean to have a get off track.
No, that's right on track. This would be much better as a discussion. So in Franklin Grand Isle, we just have received throughout the pandemic this new kind of voucher. Actually, there was about 350 of them issued around the state. And here we were able to scoop up about 39 of them. They're called CARES vouchers. And additionally, we got 13 extra Vermont rental subsidies. So these vouchers, when they do become available, which is not very frequently, are available for only people who are experiencing Category 1 literal homelessness. And then additionally, these vouchers were really only available primarily to families that had children with them. And so of our 37 CARES vouchers, 23 households have been able to find apartments. We do have 14 households who are still in the process of looking for apartments. Those 14 households have a voucher. They have skilled case management services, wrap services, sometimes case management from multiple organizations. But despite great effort, we are just not able to find available units for them. And unfortunately, if they cannot find available units by June, they will lose the ability to utilize those vouchers. And in part, that's because we in Franklin County, like the rest of the state, have really limited housing stock. I've done this a couple of times. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do it more recently, but on March 5th, in just a quick sort of unofficial housing search showed that in the whole of Franklin County, there were 14 available units listed. 10 of them would qualify for voucher use. The other ones' prices were set outside of the cap of how much a voucher would pay for. And notably, in addition to the postings offering those 14 available units, there were 11 postings with people saying they were searching for apartments. Most of the apartments available were in St. Albans, a couple in Swanton, only one in Enosburg, and at the time that I did the search, there were no units available in Richford, Highgate, Montgomery, Fairfield, Fletcher, and many of the other smaller towns. We do have in St. Albans and in other places too, this is just to look at St. Albans, what's considered affordable housing programs and services. In St. Albans City, there's 13 programs that offer affordable housing, and with a total of 286 units available. But really important in this is that you note that each and every single one of them is listed as having 0 vacancies. They are full. And in St. Albans town, there are 3 programs that offer affordable housing. Affordable housing doesn't necessarily mean that it's subsidized either. When we say something is subsidized, it means that a person would pay 30% of their income towards their rent, and then whatever the difference between that and the rent amount was would be covered by a subsidy. A voucher works in the same way. But some affordable housing programs offer a few subsidized units, like the new building that Champlain Housing Trust built on Congress Street. Has 33 units, 6 of those are subsidized. The rest are tax credit or market rate, which means that they're often sort of set a little bit below what is an average rent in the area. So instead of $1,200 for a 1-bedroom, it might be $980, for example, is a price at the CHT building. And again, you'll notice that in St. Albans town as well, although we have 137 units that are considered affordable housing, there are 0 vacancies and they're all running wait lists. So the immediate need that we would have if we were going to end homelessness tomorrow in Franklin and Grand Isle counties would be, we have 161 households enrolled in coordinated entry. We would urgently need housing case management from a variety of programs and services to meet needs, but we would also need 83 long-term housing vouchers, like a Section 8 or a shelter plus care, or project-based rental assistance, subsidized housing like we talked about. And we would need 25 medium-term vouchers, like Vermont rental subsidies, CARES vouchers, and rapid rehousing. So the difference between that is a Section 8 is something that you can sort of keep for as long as you income qualify, so you could keep it indefinitely. And a medium-term voucher, like a Vermont rental subsidy or CARES voucher, has a set duration, usually of between 12 months and 2 years that people can use it. And then most of the time they're able to sort of sneak into the Section 8 waitlist. They're given preference because the Section 8 waitlist is closed for anybody else. You can't sign up for it unless you have a preference. So you get a preference with one of those medium-term vouchers, or your voucher could expire and that you would be responsible for your rent in full at that point. And then 37 individuals would need only short-term assistance, like help with a security deposit or rent for like a 3-month period, and then would be able to theoretically maintain housing on their own. So we would need 131 one-bedroom apartments, 21 2-bedroom apartments, and 5 3-bedroom apartments tomorrow in order to clear out the motels. And that seems daunting and urgent, especially because it's very exciting, and we all shared that we were grateful that we were maybe looking at this pandemic easing. But for people experiencing homelessness, that also means that the FEMA funding at the motels will end. And at $6 million a month, it's not something that the state can sustain on its own. So we are really actively working as a community to sort of hopefully mitigate a disaster and build programs and services that can serve people as the motel program shifts.
Can I just make a comment, Jess?
Yeah.
It's Sarah Allerton. I would argue with all, you know, the amazing work that's going and the intensive case management, that's such a drastic undercount of the actual need. As you know, I hammer on the fact that I work with employed people who do not qualify for any of these resources and yet are still so struggling with housing insecurity. So you know, it's a hard thing to quantify, but there are thousands of people who are in need of affordable housing. I know, preaching to the choir, that like I'm working with a person right now that is working for a manufacturer, therefore making about $16 an hour, and she's struggled with, you know, being justice involved and in new recovery and paying child support, taking all of her check, and she doesn't qualify for any of these programs yet. She's in a very, very scary and insecure situation. So all this to say, you know, we need way, 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 way more. And I feel like there's a real crisis here that's not, you know, not showing up in the numbers for sure. Of yes, these people are most vulnerable, but there's a lot of vulnerability out there that's just not being addressed. And I'm starting to really struggle with how we can get attention on the fact that there's a crisis well beyond, well beyond the people in the motels.
Yeah, I thank you so much, because I had really, in the speech that I practiced in my head for the last 24 hours, I talked a lot more about that. But then I get really nervous when I actually have to talk. And so I really wanted to say that when I was going through the demographics and forgot. And, you know, I don't know how to quantify that number. We haven't really been able to suss it out. I hope you can see it in some of the HOP data that Robert had collected that says 1 in 11 families have accessed our support to pay for a needed security deposit or back rent. That's a lot of people in our community that are coming to us saying, I can't quite make this work. I'm telling you that we have, you know, 200 people or so enrolled in coordinated entry. We have thousands of people that are homeless in our communities. It's just that in rural Vermont, homelessness doesn't necessarily look like people with tarps on the street yet, although with this motel crisis looming, it could. It really looks like people sleeping on floors in other people's living rooms or kitchens. You know, it really looks like people living in cars sometimes. We just really don't have programs and services, and so we don't have a picture of what the real numbers are for homelessness or housing insecurity.
Right.
Jess, this is Robert. I just want to ask you, with some of the new CARES-related housing voucher programs and rental arrearage forgiveness programs, or actually repayment programs, and I'm asking this in kind of bouncing off what Sarah said, aren't now eligibility standards much higher? In other words, that people who may not have been eligible for assistance, say one of Sarah's clients previously, might now be eligible because the income levels have been raised?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I put down my slide presentation because it was making me nervous, and it's better to see you all. But there's actually a reason to have a lot of hope right now. But I really wanted to sort of scare and startle you all, frankly, at looking at the bleakness of it before we talked about hope. And I could really do a whole nother presentation on that, but this is a real moment in time where we are receiving quite a bit of funding to address all of those three legs of the stool. And there are really programs and services out there that people can use to stabilize themselves. And it's one of those is the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program that is being held by the Vermont State Housing Authority. And this is a very exciting program. Vermont received $200 million from the stimulus package that was passed in December for emergency rental assistance programs. So we have and 90% of that has to go directly into emergency rental assistance. And a lot of people who haven't qualified for HOP because they had to make below a certain number will qualify for this because it is set with area median incomes at or below 80%. And so for Franklin, Grand Isle County, for example, for one person, they would, if they made $53,000 or under, they would qualify. For two people, $61,000 and under would qualify. And what this program can pay for is any back rent owed that was accrued during the pandemic. So any back rent that they owe from March of 2020 on in full. And also very exciting is that this program can be used much like a housing voucher in that people can apply for it to pay their rent forward in 3-month increments, and they have to reapply every 3 months. But they could receive funding as of now for up to 15 months. And that's a complicated formula of including back rent and rent moving forward. And again, it can pay really rent in full for 3 months moving forward. So people don't have to be behind. They can use it much like a housing subsidy, and they can use it to sort of financially stabilize themselves.
Right, but in order to apply for that, you already have to have a housing plan and have found the housing so that money can go straight to the landlord. So that circles back to the lack of units.
We get really stuck. Absolutely. I mean, there's these great programs and services that we can use. We have $60,000 that we in our RHI funding. That's the Rapid Resolution Housing Initiative that we can give each person in the motel $3,500 to help pay for security deposit, rent, furniture, utilities, all of that. And we still can't move people out of motels because we can't find units for them. You know, I grew up in and still live in Fletcher, Vermont. I love rural Vermont. You know, I live in the forest where I can't see another house, and I love my drive to work where it's open farm fields and cows more than people and houses. But it has been an interesting shift for me to come to an understanding in the last year that we as a community need to be more welcoming of a significant need to build housing. We really just need housing. And we're going to have part of the American Rescue Plan is Vermont receiving $10 million to build programs and to build housing. We're also, receiving, HUD just doubled. Yesterday, they announced a doubling of what each state would get compared to last year of funding to build affordable housing. It's very hopeful. There's programs and services coming, but it's going to be a real marathon because it takes a while to build housing, and there's zoning laws and and development review boards, and we all also have to be willing to be encroached upon in rural Vermont and have more housing, welcome housing development, which is a cultural shift as well.
I was going to say, of the three-legged stool, Jess, that you're talking about, and Sarah, from where I sit, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've got to have the units, and they have to be units that are affordable. And yet everybody's got to be happy in the mix. If it's a rental unit, the landlord and this, that, and the other thing. But the bottom line is, if we don't have the housing units, we're just going to be continually spiraling on this, because to Sarah's point, there are people that are employed who are at the, you know, the point of possibly being housing insecure. And then you have all the individuals that you have very neatly detailed today as far as some of these numbers. But even with case management and even with vouchers and all the other things, if we don't have the physical housing units that we can actually have people live and thrive in, we're going to continue. I mean, think about, and I know you've talked about it, but you know, once we get past the point where a lot of these individuals are in hotels right now, I mean, these are like days of reckoning. And I know there's a lot of money that's been pumped into the system that has to be spent by a certain date. But to your point, Jess, there's also a timeline of trying to make all these things happen when it comes to infrastructure builds. But boy, we've got to figure out a way to answer that part of the puzzle. Otherwise, I think, you know, we're still going to be struggling with this on all three levels for quite some time. And I just throw that out there because in my mind, every time I hear the affordable housing words put together, you know, my mind goes right to how in the world can we as a community, as a state, figure out a way that it works for everyone and we actually get people in sustainable units where they can live and thrive. And I know there's a lot of barriers and there's a lot of other things, but boy, I'll tell you, there's got to be a way between all of the individuals that are on this call and the business community and development review boards and on we go, to be able to somehow figure this out. It's only going to better the community.
That's absolutely true, Joe, is that I think we can figure this out. I think there's answers, and we know many of them, and we have the resources now, but it's not going to happen unless we all really rally together, because it's a real crisis. Quite honestly, we're in a crisis, and it's just not easy, even though, we have the pieces of the puzzle, it's not easy to fit them together. And it's going to take everybody in order to do that. Affordable housing is super important, but then also affordable housing being tax rate or tax credit. So $900, that's not, 73% of individuals in coordinated entry have zero income. It gets really complicated,
Yeah,
and so
no
we really
question.
need everybody to participate.
If we could just change the federal definition of literal homelessness, we would have a huge step. People have to get pushed all the way to crisis before they're able to access. They have to either be literally sleeping outside or be within 14 days of losing their housing, but even that definition is very strict. And so, if somebody, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be negative, because again, I appreciate the work of everybody, but just the Working Bridges team in particular has just come up against roadblock after roadblock, and we're feeling pretty impotent at this point to help anybody at all. And so I don't know what to do about that.
Yes,
So I think you're right. I mean, I agree with you. One of the issues has been the income limits on many of these programs, and they're not designed for people who are in lower middle class, people who are working full time, often have two full-time incomes in a household and still can't make it. In many ways, we who work with the population we do, the low-income population strata in the counties, have access to programs and to funds, and we can actually respond. But as soon as you get above our level, which is set pretty low, there's nothing there.
Right.
I actually can understand what it's like. We have people who apply too, who we have to deny because they're over income, and they're aghast. What do you mean over income? You know, it's difficult. I have sympathy.
Yeah, certainly one of the gaps for over income is that, you know, you have, for a single individual, if you make more than $1,969 a month, you're not eligible for a motel room. And what has happened, especially I have a couple of at least 3 gentlemen that I talk to with some regularity who have gotten divorced during the pandemic. And have had to leave their homes because of that, or have left their homes because of the divorce. And they can afford an apartment, but they're sleeping in their cars right now because there aren't any. And they're not eligible for the motel rooms because they make too much. There's some real gaps in our system. And you know, Sarah, and it's another really important point to say that it's a system that responds to crisis. You really have to be literally homeless or at a point of imminent homelessness to access supports and services. And so that it can be really difficult for people who, you know, are trying to be proactive or who are really perpetually in a state of just not having income to support rent, just, you know, sort of permanently.
And I think I couldn't agree more. And there's a huge disconnect in what people believe the housing system supports and what it actually can. You know, people who aren't, you know, in this line of work or not experiencing it themselves assume that, oh, you need help with your housing, go get a voucher. You need transportation, go to Good News Garage, and don't understand that it doesn't work that way. And I feel like there's a huge story to tell here.
I agree with you, Sarah, and I think that, you know, one of the values of the kind of presentations we get through the partnership here that Joe arranges and the others is we get to see what the neighborhood is really like. And what Jess is doing is saying, this is where we live. This is what it's really like. But outside of this community, this group here, that knowledge isn't widespread. I began working with the Rotary, actually, and Karen Rushla, and some of you may know Karen, about trying to form a group of individuals in the community in order to begin to, in some way, develop a consciousness in the community about what the real need is and what it really is like to live in this community, and in a lot of communities too. We got sidetracked by COVID like everything else did. But I was talking to Karen just recently about trying to restart that and seeing if we can once again put together a coalition of community members, not just people working in nonprofits or working in healthcare, but people in the community at all levels, to begin to think about how do we describe ourselves to ourselves, and how can we do that honestly, and then what kind of response from the community might emerge if we really saw the neighborhood the way that it was. And I'll keep folks posted about this because I think it's a responsibility we have. And it's a challenge, and I don't know, I sense maybe society is changing a little bit, that awareness is growing, and maybe secondary to the pandemic and the kind of shock we felt and the kind of opening that's happening. It may be a change in administration in Washington and attitudes about what the role of government and society is in the lives of the individual. But I really want to get that kind of conversation, or get some way of raising consciousness about these issues. So I'll keep you posted of that, and we certainly would invite participation. But you're really onto something. I mean, it can be very frustrating. Obviously, it's frustrating to us, but we're not even the ones who are, in fact, in the dilemma, in the throes of the dilemma. It's our clients.
Speaking of inviting participation, I'm going to put my email in the chat. There's multiple ways to participate. We have a COC meeting that meets monthly. That's a continuum of care that we would really appreciate people attending. Even if somebody else from your organization already attends, we can have duplicates. We need more people. And then there's a community homelessness response team that meets on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12 till 1. And I would also invite participation there. And I'm happy to send out a document with the housing meetings and links so that people can participate. But email me if you would like links and are interested. I think I interrupted somebody when I started talking. Was it Jessica?
Yeah, just more of being new and not knowing what's around. Is there an organization or is there any voice that's sort of led by homeless folks or housing insecure folks? In a way that they could share their stories with, us.
It's a goal of all of those meetings to have people with lived experience participate, and it is a struggle to get people with lived experience to participate. But it's a goal that we have and a conversation that we have.
Thank you.
There's a project for you, Jessica.
Jess, I do just want to thank you again. I know how much you love doing presentations. I know it's not really your comfort zone, but you are a natural. You do a phenomenal job, and the PowerPoint was amazing. The information and the explanation that you give through each slide was so appreciated. I know this is a topic that we work together on. A number of people in this meeting do, and just as it was said, how can we get the message out to our community in addition to the people who are attending these kinds of meetings? So I can't thank you enough, Jess, for being such a valuable voice in this community when it comes to people struggling with homelessness.
And again, thanks to all of you. The meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene next month, May the 5th. And again, have a great month, everybody, and keep doing the great work that you do. And we'll see you next month on May the 5th, okay?